A raging river, a desperate cry, and one cowboy's leap into destiny. He saved her from drowning, but never knew she would claim his heart forever. This story will stay with you long after it ends. Like, subscribe, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Let's get started. The storm had left the land scarred, trees bent low, and the river swollen into a wild, raging beast. The cowboy, only 30 years of age, had ridden for hours across the soaked plains, his horse restless beneath him. Solitude was his closest companion, and silence usually his comfort. But that evening's silence was broken by something that made his blood run cold. A desperate cry carried on the wind. He turned sharply in his saddle, scanning the canyon below, until his eyes locked on the sight of a woman thrashing helplessly in the roaring, merciless water. He didn't hesitate. Throwing his hat aside, he slid from his horse and sprinted toward the riverbank. The current was vicious, churning like 1,000 wild mustangs, but his heart allowed no pause. A flash of copper-toned skin, dark hair clinging to her face, told him she was alive, but seconds from death. He plunged into the freezing water, every muscle screaming against the force dragging him under. His arms cut through the flood, fighting not just for his survival, but for hers, a stranger who had suddenly become his only purpose. The cold bit deep, wrapping around his lungs like iron chains. Every wave slammed into him with the weight of a mountain, threatening to pull him below. But ahead she flailed, her strength failing, her cries fading into the roar. Summoning everything within, he pressed forward, teeth clenched, body straining against the pull. His hand finally brushed her arm. With a surge of desperation, he hooked his arm around her waist, dragging her up as she sputtered and coughed. She clung to him instinctively, her fingers clawing at his shirt as though holding to life itself. The river fought them viciously, spinning and dragging them down again and again. His vision blurred with exhaustion, and water burned in his lungs. Still, he refused to release her. Inch by inch, stroke by stroke, he pressed toward the distant bank where salvation lay. When his boots finally scraped the muddy bottom, a surge of determination carried him forward. Gasping, half dragging her limp body, he staggered from the current. The earth beneath his knees felt like heaven itself as he collapsed onto the soaked grass, the weight of her against him proving she still lived. For a long moment, all he heard was the furious rush of water and the hammer of his own heart. Then slowly she stirred. Her lashes, heavy with water, fluttered open, revealing eyes dark as midnight, yet burning with life. She coughed, clutching her chest, every breath a battle between survival and surrender. He reached out, steadying her with trembling hands. "You're safe," he whispered, though he himself was unsure if either of them truly were. But in that instant, he didn't care about his fatigue or danger. Her survival mattered more than his own aching body. She turned her gaze to him, her lips parted as if forming words, but none came. Instead, silent tears slipped down her cheeks, mingling with the river water. In those eyes, he saw more than fear. He saw a storm of pride, pain, and a gratitude so deep it cut through him like a knife. He realized she wasn't just anyone. She was Apache, her heritage written in every line of her face, her strength, her fire. Yet here she was, vulnerable in his arms, alive only because fate had placed him in her path that very night. The cowboy had seen his share of violence between settlers and native tribes. Suspicion, mistrust, and bloodshed often painted the frontier red. Yet none of that lived in her expression. She did not curse him as an enemy, nor did she push him away. She only stared at him with a kind of reverence, as if destiny had chosen him alone. For reasons he couldn't yet name, his chest tightened. He had ridden countless miles, searching for meaning beyond ranch fences and lonely nights, and perhaps, just perhaps, the answer had been swept into his arms by the river itself. The woman's breathing steadied, though her body trembled from the cold. Without thinking, he removed his coat and wrapped it around her slender shoulders. She shivered but did not resist, drawing closer as though drawn by some unseen thread between them. "You saved my life," she whispered at last. Her voice hoarse yet clear, carrying the weight of something far beyond gratitude. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words never formed. For the first time in years, he felt the power of silence, a silence not of emptiness, but of connection, deeper than any words could forge. The prairie wind swept over them, carrying the scent of rain and the echoes of distant thunder. Somewhere, his horse pawed nervously at the earth, but the cowboy barely noticed. Every thought, every heartbeat was captured by the woman before him. He wanted to ask her name, her story, what cruel fate had left her in the river's deadly grasp. Yet when he looked into her eyes, none of that seemed urgent. What mattered was the present, the undeniable truth that two lives had collided at the edge of death, and something far greater than chance held them bound together. She shifted, closer, her hand trembling as it brushed his chest, resting over the furious drum of his heart. "Now," she whispered, her tone carrying both strength and vulnerability, "I belong to you, but you also belong to me." The word startled him more than the river had. Belong? To her? He swallowed hard, trying to speak, but her gaze silenced him. It wasn't a plea, it was a declaration. Something ancient, something sacred shimmered in her words. And though he had never asked for it, part of him already knew her claim was true, sealed by fate itself. The cowboy closed his eyes for a breath, steadying himself against the whirlwind inside him. He was a drifter, a wanderer, tied to no land and no person. Yet here, in the fading light of day, he felt chains unlike any he had ever known, not chains of burden, but of belonging. It scared him, but it also stirred a warmth long forgotten. When he opened his eyes, her gaze had not wavered. She was not a damsel rescued, nor a stranger in need. She was something more. She was the answer to a question he hadn't known he carried. Above them, the storm clouds finally broke, revealing a strip of fiery sunset across the horizon. The world, scarred and battered by rain, now glowed in golden light. He looked at her, truly looked, and realized her presence felt as inevitable as the sunrise. Perhaps he had not saved her at all. Perhaps she had been sent to save him. His heart, long hardened by solitude, beat with a rhythm new and terrifying. As she leaned into him, her eyes shimmering, he whispered the truth that burned through him. "You're safe with me. And maybe I'm safe with you, too." The cowboy sat in stunned silence as her words sank deeper into his soul. "You are my life now." Simple, yet eternal. For years he had lived with no ties, no promises, only the trail stretching endlessly before him. But in her voice, he heard something sacred. Something that tethered him in a way no land, no ranch, no gold ever could. He looked at her hand resting gently over his chest, felt the warmth of her palm against his beating heart, and understood that his life had been forever altered, claimed by her truth and destiny's quiet command. She was fragile in that moment, still trembling from the river's fury, yet her spirit glowed with unshakable strength. Her eyes, dark as obsidian, held no fear, only certainty. He had seen men stare down rifles and falter, but she faced her own fate with unyielding resolve. He whispered almost to himself, "I don't deserve this." But she shook her head gently, her wet hair clinging to her face. "You didn't just pull me from the river," she said softly. "You pulled me back to life, and now that life belongs to you." The cowboy had no words. The plains stretched wide before them, glowing beneath the blood-red sunset. The world felt both infinite and impossibly small, reduced to just the two of them, sitting on the bank of the river that had nearly stolen everything. The cowboy shifted, steadying her as she leaned against him, her breath warm against his chest. He thought of every lonely campfire, every endless night filled with nothing but silence. He had prayed once, long ago, for something more, and here she was, an answer carved from fate's hand, not by chance, but by a force greater than both their wills. His horse whinnied from a distance, restless but loyal, yet he made no move to leave. For the first time in years, there was no urgency to ride, no hunger to chase the horizon. The only place he needed to be was here, beside her. Her hand gripped his shirt as if she feared he might vanish. He bent closer, his voice low, steady, and raw. "You're not alone anymore." The words surprised even him, for they felt like a vow. She closed her eyes, a faint smile ghosting her lips, as if she had been waiting to hear that. As night slowly descended, the stars pricked the sky one by one, like lanterns of hope. A breeze swept over the river, carrying the scent of earth and pine. He felt her shiver, so he pulled her tighter against him, his coat still wrapped around her slender frame. For years he had believed strength meant solitude, that only the untethered heart could survive the wild. But holding her, he realized strength was not in standing alone. Strength was in surrender, in allowing another soul to rest in the fragile place one had sworn to guard. She had entered that place. She shifted, her voice breaking the silence. "Among my people, when a life is saved, it is more than a gift. It is a bond. You are part of me now, and I am part of you. That cannot be broken." He listened carefully, every word echoing deeper than the thunder had earlier. He had never been one for promises, but this was no ordinary vow. It was sacred, spoken from a heart that carried both her heritage and her soul's truth. He nodded slowly, his throat tightening. "Then I swear," he whispered, "I will honor that bond forever." Her fingers traced the scars on his hand, lingering on each mark left by a life of hardship. She looked up at him, eyes filled with quiet wonder. "You've carried so much pain," she murmured. He didn't answer, but his silence confessed more than words ever could. She pressed her forehead lightly against his chest. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." The cowboy felt something inside him unravel, a weight he hadn't realized he bore until now. For the first time, the ache of solitude began to ease, replaced with something fragile, dangerous, and achingly beautiful: hope. The night deepened, and the river's roar softened to a whisper. Together they sat beneath the stars, two souls who should have been strangers, now bound by forces beyond their understanding. The cowboy thought of the road ahead, of dangers and divisions that would not easily forgive such a union. But when he looked into her eyes, he realized none of it mattered. What mattered was this moment, carved from fate's hand, pure and undeniable. "From this day on," he murmured, his voice steady, "my heart is yours." She smiled softly, a single tear glistening like silver under the moonlight. They spoke little more that night. Words felt unnecessary, fragile things compared to the truth already shared between them. He held her close, and she leaned against him, her breathing steady, calm, safe. For years, his nights had been filled with emptiness, but now the silence held a rhythm, a shared heartbeat, a promise that neither of them would walk alone again. In her, he found something he hadn't dared believe possible, a home not built of wood or stone, but of love. And in him, she found more than a rescuer. She found her forever. The dawn rose slowly, painting the horizon in hues of gold and rose. Birds stirred in the cottonwoods, singing the world awake. He watched as the light touched her face, softening her features, illuminating the strength and grace etched into her. She stirred, blinking against the morning sun, then smiled, a smile that melted every defense he had ever built. "Good morning," she whispered. He chuckled, a sound he had nearly forgotten how to make. "It is now." In that gentle exchange, they both knew. Their old lives had ended in the river. A new journey together had just begun. As the sun climbed higher, they rose from the riverbank hand in hand. The cowboy lifted her gently onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arm secure around her waist. She leaned back into him without hesitation, her trust absolute. With a nudge of his heel, the horse moved forward, carrying them across the open plains. No destination was needed. Wherever they went, they carried their home in each other. The river had tried to claim her, but instead it had given them both something greater, a love written not in chance, but in destiny's eternal hand. Riding across the wide horizon, the cowboy felt the sun's warmth on his back and her heartbeat, steady beneath his hand. For the first time, he wasn't searching for something beyond the next ridge. He had already found it. She belonged to his heart, not as a possession, but as the missing half of his soul. And as the wind carried them forward, he whispered into her hair words only she could hear. "Wherever we go, you are my life now." Her smile answered him, bright and certain. Together they disappeared into the endless plains, never to be alone again.